Good evening and welcome to the LaSalle Public Library's virtual programming. Tonight we're welcoming Chris Benda, the Illinois botanizer, the very unique program about tallgrass prairies and how we can still find remnants of the plants that once grew all over Illinois. What better program for those of us who at least got to enjoy a little bit of sunshine here in central Illinois than to think about spring. This is a terrific program and unique, and we hope you'll enjoy it. We are recording tonight's program and we'll be posting it on our website in the next day or so, along with Chris's website. Again, it's illinoisbotanizer.com. And we will be taking questions in the chat box, and we will cover those at the end of the program. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Chris. Welcome, Chris. And you can see he's already got a slide shared there, and off we go. Chris?
Okay, thank you for the invitation and the introduction. I'm excited to speak about this topic on Illinois pioneer cemetery prairies. So again, my name is Chris Benda, and I work with a variety of agencies and institutions, past and currently, throughout the state. Basically, I'm a freelance botanist, give a lot of presentations, do surveys, something different every day. Also, I go by Illinois Botanizer, Donna mentioned, and see my website there. And of course, I have all the social media taken care of with mainly posting to Facebook on Illinois Botanizer page, and my YouTube channel, where you can actually find a 30-minute video about this same topic that I made a few months ago. So I encourage you to check that out as well. And then this is what I do for a living. Things have been challenging here during the pandemic, but I do a lot of presentations and other variety of plant work. So if you need a botanist, let me know. Also want to direct you to my website, where I have a plants database, and I have over 1,000 species on there now with photos and information. So that's a useful resource. And programming has slowed down a lot, obviously, but I have a way you can subscribe to the mailing list if you want to stay tuned with my speaking schedule. The schedule is on my website, but if you want little reminders of what's coming up, you can sign up on each page on the website. And lastly, I'll plug this class here at the Morton Arboretum. I designed this course a couple of years ago, Botanical Names Demystified, and it talks about why we use scientific names and the meanings of the names and all sorts of things like that. So if you're interested in that topic, check out the Morton Arboretum website. They usually offer that online course a couple times a year. So that's really an interesting resource as well, I want to let you know about. And also the Illinois Native Plant Society is a group that I've been involved with for over a decade and had served as their past president and other positions as well. So that's an organization that I recommend you check out. We have 7 chapters throughout the state. And this is our state board here at our retreat last year. So if you want to support plants and natural communities in Illinois, it's a great organization to belong to. Okay, so I want to start with this story. This is Dr. Gerald Wilhelm, and he is an eminent botanist in Illinois, Chicagoland, and he is the lead author on the work of science, The Flora of the Chicago Region. And his story about how he became a botanist kind of relates to something we need to keep in mind when we're talking about the pioneer cemetery prairies. So Jerry, basically, to kind of make a long story short here, he was, after his studies at the university, he was, it was during the Vietnam War, and he was drafted into the Army. And they were trying to figure out, where can we best utilize a biologist for your undergraduate degree here. And he thought, he was going to be sent to Vietnam, and instead they sent him to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to work in Vicksburg, Mississippi, and be their lead biologist, which he admitted that he was a little intimidated by at the time. And his first task was to go to Lockport, Illinois, They were dredging the Illinois River for navigation, and all that dredge spoil needed to be dumped on land somewhere. And 2 years previously, we had the National Environmental Policy Act was passed, meaning federal projects needed to have environmental assessment done. So he was tasked with identifying or visiting these 50 sites that had been identified to determine which ones could have dredge spoil deposited on them and which maybe were too sensitive to that. And he admittedly said that he wasn't exactly sure how to go about this. And so he met up with Floyd Swink and Ray Schulenberg at the Morton Arboretum, and he took them out to these sites and they helped him identify plants. And at most of the sites, they were very weedy, and they would say common plants like, here's, Ambrosia artemisifolia and Taraxacum officinale and, Dactylus glomerata, and these just, weeds, often European species. But then they went to what is now Lockport Prairie, and Ray said, oh my gosh, this is Muhlenbergia cuspidata, the prairie satin grass. Never seen this before. Dropped to his knees, identified other plants with names that Jerry hadn't heard at the other site, and he looked up at Jerry and he said, or what I should say first is that all the sites they visited, Ray would look at Jerry and say, don't worry, you can spoil here, it'll grow back. But at this site, it was so remarkable, he looked up at Jerry and said, this is America, do not spoil here because it will not grow back. So Jerry said that was his epiphany in life, and he wanted to know that moment forward when he was standing in the true America and when he was not. The true America being the plants and the assemblage of species together at this location where they've evolved, and the climate and the microbes in the soil and all the factors that go into evolution for a plant. And that was all intact in this remnant natural community. And so he devised a metric called the coefficient of conservatism. And we call this a C value, and it's a spectrum of from 0 to 10, a range that you give a number to the plant. So plants, native plants that are successful in badly damaged habitats, which I would call ecologically weeds, are given values of C close to a 0. On the other end of the spectrum, species virtually restricted to natural areas, these intact remnant natural communities, those have if they're plants only found there, then it would be a C value closer to 10. So the conservative plants are often indicators of a remnant high quality natural community in Illinois. And if you look at the further reading, that Irigenia publication has all the plants known from Illinois as of 1997 with their C value on it. So you can find that on the Illinois Native Plant Society website. And it's a very useful metric for determining quality of a given parcel of land. And this all came from this experience that Jerry had from being drafted and working with the Army Corps of Engineers and Ray Schulenberg and Floyd Swink. So quite a life story there. And now most states have their own lists of C values for plants that occur in those states. It's a really useful metric. A high quality natural community is one that retains or has recovered its original natural character, need not be completely undisturbed, but it's essentially pristine. We call it pristine or nearly pristine, grade A and grade B. Those are the high quality of remnants in Illinois. Now, before Jerry came on the scene, we had George Fell, who was also a pioneer in the nature movement, and particularly the natural areas movement. He, in 1959, with his wife, worked in Washington, D.C. to start essentially the Nature Conservancy. And successful organization, obviously, as we know now. And also he formed the Natural Land Institute, which continues to this day in Rockford. And there's a book about his life called The Force of Nature that I recommend you read, because not only was George really instrumental in Illinois, it basically was the founder of the natural areas movement in a worldwide scale. And I think a lot of people don't know that. When we think of names like, Teddy Roosevelt and John Muir and, Henry David Thoreau and those, we should have George Fell's name among them. He's really that influential in this cause. And he basically said, we're living at the time of man's final conquest over the wilderness. What we have saved and what we may save in the next few years will be all the wild, true nature that will remain to pass on from generation to generation in the years ahead. There will never be another chance. George he wrote the law for the Illinois Nature Preserves Commission, and he was the first director. And we now have almost 600 nature preserves in Illinois, all started by the vision of George Fell and enacted with his leadership. So that also led to the INAI in 1976. They started the INAI, which is the Natural Heritage Inventory. Again, the first of its kind. Illinois was the first state to have a systematic, section by section analysis of the entire state to look for these natural community remnants. And they did a 3-year push to identify the majority of these sites. And in 1979, they found that just 0.07% of Illinois is in a pristine natural condition. So 0.07%. Very little amount. But you can see on the map there that they are distributed throughout Illinois. In fact, every county in the 102 counties has at least one natural area within it. A lot of them are privately owned, but a lot of them are also publicly owned. Here's another graph that shows, how little remaining high quality natural land we have in Illinois. There's 36 million acres in the state. Majority of that is in agriculture, and the high quality natural communities, again, 0.077% of the state remaining in a high quality, nearly pristine natural condition. This table shows all the natural communities that are known from Illinois. And there's types of forests, types of savanna, types of prairies, types of wetlands, and bedrock. So there's different community types throughout the state. And we're going to talk about prairie. So here's an example of one of these natural area remnants. This is Sunbury Railroad Prairie in Livingston County. And you can see the sort of shrubby grayish looking plant there is lead plant. Lead plant has a very deep taproot. Once you plow land, lead plant is destroyed and it will not come back. And so it's an indicator of a high quality prairie. And you see there on the left of the photo, there's a berm. That's where the railroad used to be. It's been removed. And then you see on to the right, there's a soybean field and a fence. So for whatever little strip of land in between the railroad and the farmer's field was never plowed, never destroyed. And that's really the key thing when we think about prairie. There's lots of places around that may have prairie plants, but we're talking about land that has never been tilled. And that is very, very rare in Illinois. We've converted most of the prairie to agriculture, right? The prairie soil is very productive. You think about a prairie plant, the majority of the plant is really underground as roots. Whatever you see above ground, at least twice that is underground as roots. And so those roots that form and decay over time, that's what created this highly valuable, productive, organic black soil that is really good at growing things, particularly corn and soybeans in Illinois. So the key thing, never plowed. And these remnants are often very small. A quarter acre sometimes, up to 5 acres. If you have more than 5 acres of high quality remnant prairie, that would be considered large in Illinois, at least for black soil prairie. So that leads me to this quote that I really like: "Every scrap of biodiversity is priceless, never to be surrendered without a struggle." E.O. Wilson. And we have a special plant here in Illinois, the Kankakee mallow, that symbolizes that statement. But that's a story for another day. So that's a little depressing. How about little jokes here before we moved on? Here's the Germinator, Hosta on Visa, baby. And then here we have poplar trees and not so poplar trees. And if you don't think those are funny, then what's the matter with you? Right? Stomates there on the leaves of plants. Okay, so I also want to just briefly mention Illinois glacial history. If you're unaware, most of Illinois is glaciated either in the Illinois episode about 150,000 years ago, or during the Wisconsin episode about 12, 15,000 years ago. But the sort of beige colored areas were never covered in glacial ice. So we have up in Joe Davis County, Northwest Illinois, the Driftwoods region, Calhoun County, where the Illinois and Mississippi rivers come together, a little bit here in the East St. Louis area, and then of course Southern Illinois, unglaciated areas. So when you think about plants, plants have to migrate during periods of extreme climate change. When the glaciers were moving, plants were moving south, and so they were in these we had refuges, right, in the southern part of the state where these plants migrated and persisted and then migrated back north as the climate warmed. So it's really interesting to consider the glacial history and the implications to plant ecology. Okay, so there are 14 natural divisions in the state, and one of them we call the Grand Prairie. And this is the tall grass prairie region. Now there's prairie outside of the Grand Prairie Natural Division, but this is the heart of it. This is the division that has most of what we think of as the high quality tall grass, super productive soil prairie. So Illinois is called the Prairie State. And like mentioned, there was formerly a predominance of the prairie in Illinois. 22 million acres of the 36 million acres were estimated to be prairie pre-settlement times, and has been reduced to 2,200 acres of high quality prairie. So 1/100% of the high quality prairie once found in Illinois remains to this day. So very little, and of course that makes what remains very precious, priceless, and areas that we want to not only protect but manage and restore in some cases. So this scene here is at Illinois Beach Nature Preserve, which was our first nature preserve in Illinois. And since Illinois was the first state to have a nature preserve system, it's the first nature preserve in the nation. And if you go to the site in the parking lot, there's a sign that mentions that. Okay, so Aldo Leopold noted that cocoons only converse with the dead. That's what he wrote in his Sand County Almanac. And he noticed that this plant, Hoary cocoon, Lithospermum canescens, he only saw it growing in pioneer cemeteries, pioneer cemetery prairies, where the cemetery was formed in the 1800s, so long ago that it was set aside, never plowed, never damaged. Obviously they dug some holes and buried the settlers that died there. But this would be a conservative plant. So it's not found on the wider landscape because we've plowed those areas. We've changed them drastically. This is a conservative plant found in remnant intact natural communities like those found in these early pioneer cemeteries. Okay, so here's one in Illinois, Munson Township Cemetery Prairie Nature Preserve. So as I said, the early humans the early Europeans to settle in Illinois were in the 1800s, and when they died, they established these cemeteries. A lot of them are mowed, and there's not a lot of indication of a high quality community type of any type, but some of them actually have the remnant prairie vegetation present among the gravestones, and that's what the focus of this presentation is about, these pioneer cemetery prairies. So they're often pretty small. This one at Munson is a little bit on the larger side, but often they're 5 acres or less. And you can see in the background what has happened to the remaining, prairie landscape in Illinois. It's farmland, but here's some persisting here in Henry County at Munson Township, which is one of the finer cemetery prairies in Illinois. And if you look here, here's a Google Earth image of Munson Cemetery. And you can see there in the green, that's the site. Now, not all of that in the green is high quality, it's just a portion of that, but you can see there's a little circular trail, and there's some white markers for the gravestones. And if we back out here, you see the square on the picture. That large square is one section, so that's 640 acres, 1 square mile. And you can see Munson Cemetery, how big it is in relation to one section or 1 square mile. And if you back out even farther, you can see lots of these larger squares. See, if you go across this way, down and over, that's 1 square mile. And you can see almost perfectly all these squares divided up on this map. And those are the sections. So in regards to this map, you can barely see Munson Cemetery. We've cleared all the prairie for farmland, and we have just little drainages that remain vegetated. So in the larger context of Illinois, you can see how small these cemetery prairies are. Now, if you consider just like 7 or 8 counties around Champaign where they have this really high quality, black soil prairie, it's estimated in 1980 that just 18 acres remained in that area. This particular, there's many different types of prairie, which I'll explain later, but the black soil prairie is the really rich, organic, productive soil that most of it's been converted to farmland. So very little of that type of prairie remaining, and most of these high quality remnants are in these cemetery prairies because they were set aside and saved and revered and never plowed. Another way of looking at it is if you take the state of Illinois and you scale it to one regular piece of paper, 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, that's the size of Illinois. You type one lowercase o on the paper, fill in half of that o, and that accounts for this amount of prairie remaining in the state. Just a tiny, tiny amount, really. And it's not even all together in one spot. It's scattered around throughout the Grand Prairie Natural Division. However, I created this map for a talk I did about 5-6 years ago on the same topic, and it shows that there are 29 high quality pioneer cemeteries, cemetery prairies in Illinois. So there are a lot of pioneer cemeteries, and there are pioneer cemeteries that are in places that used to be prairie. That doesn't mean they have high quality prairie plants and remnant natural communities present. A lot of them have been degraded. A lot of them just look like a lawn. They're mowed and they're manicured, and there's no sign of prairie plants. But these 29 throughout the state are considered to be high quality. If you contact me, I'd be happy to share this map with you, along with this list. So these are the numbers, the names that go with the numbers on the previous map. There are 29, as I said, and I have been to 14, so I've been to about half of them, and I have 10 here that I'm going to feature in this talk. One thing I want to mention here that's kind of interesting is if you look at number 8 and number 9 here, number 8 is St. Mary's Cemetery Hill Prairie. So that means at this cemetery, there's a hill prairie present. Instead of a black soil, flat prairie, this is a prairie on a hill. But on number 9, it's Temperance Hill Cemetery Prairie. So it's not Temperance Cemetery Hill Prairie. There's no hill prairie there. It's a regular prairie, but the site called Temperance Hill. So it's a little tricky there with the words. So there's a hill prairie is different than sort of our black soil cemetery prairie. But you can see there's lots of counties there. They're scattered throughout Illinois. So let's start here with one here that's definitely one of the higher quality cemetery prairies in Illinois. It's at Weston. So if you get off the interstate highway, Interstate 55 here north of Bloomington, the Chinoa exit, and you head east, you can easily find Weston Cemetery. There's a little farm lane you can drive back to the prairie, and it is absolutely exquisite. Very high quality. You can see this is Canada milk vetch, Astragalus canadensis, here present at this prairie, and you see the soybeans, of course, in the background. I should also mention that some of these sites are being somewhat invaded by weeds like crown vetch or white sweet clover. And so if you live near one, it would be really valuable if you were able to volunteer your time to help some of these places, whether it's helping a prescribed fire or helping with the removing invasive plants. I would contact the Illinois Nature Preserves Commission staff in your area, or somebody at the Department of Natural Resources, or even your Master Naturalist program with the University of Illinois Extension. Those are good places to reach out to, because we need lots of help and time to continue to maintain these prairies. There's Weston. And then another thing that's interesting about these sites, and this is here at Weston, here is the high quality prairie ends abruptly at the farmland. And if you were to stand, on the farmland side and walk to the prairie, you would step up about 18 inches. Now, as I mentioned before, a lot of a prairie plant exists underground as roots. And of course, those roots hold the soil together. So you can see profound effect of soil erosion around these cemetery prairies, where they're basically little mounds of soil that's been, saved and held together, versus the surrounding farmland. It's been plowed, so it's been moved, and it's been eroded and washed away at rich topsoil. So it's really profoundly seen at these prairies. And ideally, what would happen, instead of having this abrupt transition, is for a small buffer to be purchased around the prairie, and then you take the prairie seed that you can collect in the remnant prairie and then scatter it in the buffer area around the edge. It won't be as high quality as the remnant, but it will have the same species and it'll protect it a little bit. These farmers, I'm sure, are spraying herbicides, all over the farm fields, and that's going to affect the prairie. They're going to have herbicide drift. So we like to have a little buffer around the prairies that help protect them. Of course, that's a big effort to do, and so many times there's not the will or the money, or the farmer doesn't want to sell the land. Something you can do, but at one site that has been done. Okay, so let's move on to another high quality remnant is the Pellville, sometimes spelled Pellsville Cemetery Prairie in Vermilion County. You can see the gravestones there amongst all the prairie dock. Okay, and I actually have an article that the Chicago Tribune interviewed me for a few years ago that talks about some of these sites and the idea of these pioneer cemeteries, giving the idea some press. If you go and Google Illinois pioneer cemetery prairies, you're not going to find a whole lot of information there, and that's one reason why I like this topic and I enjoy this presentation, is really letting people understand in Illinois what these remnant prairies are, and how they exist here, these little remnants at the pioneer cemeteries. Now, another one really close to Loda, or close to Pellsville, that I just talked about, is Loda Cemetery. And there's really a lot of interesting history at Loda Cemetery Prairie. This one actually doesn't have any gravestones within the prairie. This one was land, so they have the Pine Ridge Cemetery at Loda, and it's where the burials are, and this prairie ground was behind that, and so they had always in the cemetery into the prairie at one time with active burials. And when the prairie was found by biologists in the 1970s, they wanted it to be saved, and in a lot of cases it wasn't an easy effort to obtain and set aside these prairie remnants. And in fact, if you watch the video that I made on YouTube about Illinois pioneer cemetery prairies, I'll have some more information about the background on this particular site, because it's really one that was challenging to protect, but in the end it was protected. And like I mentioned earlier, this one has a buffer around it. The Grand Prairie Friends in Central Illinois, a nonprofit group, they own and manage this prairie, and they were able to really enhance it in many ways. They actually have a viewing, ADA accessible viewing platform there, so you can drive right up to it and look out over the prairie remnant, and you can actually see Interstate 57 there in the background of this prairie. So you can see the rattlesnake master and the tall prairie docks, and blazing stars and lots of other plants, gray-headed coneflower right here at Loda. Another one nearby is Prospect. If you go to Pellsville, go to Loda, and go to Prospect, you can visit all three easily in one day. They're all near the interstate there in Vermilion, Ford County, Iroquois County. This one is in the town of Paxton, right on the edge of town, and you can drive right up to it also. And it's again just another precious remnant prairie set aside as a nature preserve in Illinois. You see the turkey foot grass there up in the sky. That's big blue stem, Andropogon giardii. So high quality prairie at that one. One of my visits, I had prairie phlox pilosa, is blooming in profusion. So you often see different plants in mass bloom depending on when you visit the site. So I call those three the trifecta of the cemetery prairies in Illinois: Pellsville, Loda, and Prospect. Okay, a little farther north, you can find one in Grundy County, Short Cemetery Prairie. This one actually is received some management recently from the Friends of the Nature Preserves, is a newly formed organization led by Steve Packard and others, and they've been giving some love back to this little cemetery prairie there in Grundy County. You can see the plant there is Phlox bifida, the cleft phlox. But this one is definitely small but high quality for those of you, a little further north in Illinois. And another one in the northern part of the state is Beach Cemetery Prairie Nature Preserve. It's in Ogle County. And the Beach family owned this site for a long time. That's how it got the name. Now it's owned by the Natural Land Institute. And this is a dry prairie. It's on a hill. So the hill kind of slopes down to the surrounding farmland. And so a dry hill prairie is going to have plants that are adapted to those drier conditions, like round-headed bush clover, Symbioticum sericium is the silky aster. This site has a lot of prairie sage, Artemisia luteoliciana, and things like that. So different, prairie plants grow different prairies depending on the soil moisture, and this one is on the dry end. The tallgrass prairie is tall grass because it's wet. We get a fair amount of rain in Illinois, and we have, in Champaign, the water table historically was very close to the surface. That's why drain tiles were installed at a lot of these sites that are now farmland. The farmers want to drain the water quickly to grow crops. But historically, it would stay wet a lot of the time. And of course, a lot of rain and productive soil means a lot of plant growth. And that's why we have tall grass prairie in Illinois. If you go farther west, where it's much more dry, we have shortgrass prairie. So the precipitation really factors into this as well. And so on Beach Cemetery, it's pretty well drained, and it's on the drier end of the spectrum. And you see a different perspective here, looking in different directions. A lone tree there. You can see flowering spurge blooming there across the prairie. Other grasses and things. So Beach Cemetery, easy access right along the road. You park and do a quick stroll and see the remnant prairie, the natural heritage of the state of Illinois. And there's another one in Will County. It's sort of on the northern end of things, and it's called Vermont Cemetery Prairie Nature Preserve, and it's now owned by Will County Forest Preserve District. And they, have a big parking lot where it's all manicured with, I think there's frisbee golf or some, playground stuff. So most of it is a park-like preserve, but within the site, they have the remnant cemetery prairie that actually has a fence around it. There was a problem years ago with off-road vehicles tearing through the prairie and causing damage, and so it was fenced long ago. In fact, I heard that Ray Schulenberg had a key to the, when they put up the fence, he locked the gate and gave away the key, and he said, he didn't want to be seen as an elitist, only he had access to go into the prairie. So he thought, well, they're going to fence it off to save it. Fine. Others can't easily go, and he kind of stopped visiting that site as well. So it's a little harder to see. You can't really walk through it, but a fence is valuable in many respects from damage. So that's another site that you can easily go visit, and it's an Illinois nature preserve there up in Will County. And I did take this picture there of the heath aster, Symbioticum ericoides, quite beautiful plant in the aster family there that blooms later in the year. And we also have a couple savannas, actually. So they're not all cemetery prairies. We do have some cemetery savannas. Of course, a savanna has, spaced out oak trees in them, particularly post oak. And here's one in Montgomery County called Roberts Savanna. And as you can tell by the picture, this sign is actually somewhat representative of the site, at least when I visited it in 2012. It needs some management. If they don't receive regular wildfire, shrubs will grow up in them, or often weedy species. You see all the yellow is a Canada goldenrod. That's a native plant, but not desirable, not shouldn't be in that proportion in a high quality area. So the sign falling apart there is kind of suggests that the site is falling apart, but you know, these sites ebb and flow sometimes, and I don't know the particular outcomes for this one, but I think there are some people that are doing what they can to bring it back up into its former glory, as far as the high quality is concerned. I see another site, another picture here. This is the Savannah blazing star, Liatris scariosa variety, Newlandii. And then you can see the gravestone there. Died 1880, it says. Looks like he was 30 years old. So interesting, you know, even from a historical context, to visit some of these sites. Okay, Roberts Cemetery was that one. And there's another Savannah near Champaign, Vermilion County, called Fairchild Cemetery, Savannah. And, you know, this is also Grand Prairie Friends that manages it. So they do great work, and it's in high quality condition. It's definitely worth visiting, and you can see there, you know, much more tree cover than you would find on a prairie there at the Fairchild Cemetery, Savannah. And some more pictures here. This one, the gravestone says, died 1882 at 22 years old. Etna Daniel, wife of H. Allen. And you see the flowers around the base of the gravestone there. Those, of course, are not native flowers. I don't even know if those are real flowers or fake ones, but often you see some strange plants that were, you know, planted around the gravestones by the loved ones of, you know, these settlers. But you can see the big oak tree, you know, over here in the background, indicating savanna-like conditions. Now, I wanted to mention that at these sites, there's prairie visible, but there are different types of prairie in Illinois. So a lot of these that I had mentioned and kind of have said already are black soil prairie. They're generally flat. They're, you know, it's got really dark, rich, organic, productive soil. And that's mostly been converted to farmland. So those are really the rarest remnants that we have in these pioneer cemeteries and savannas. But there's other types of prairie. I mentioned Illinois, particularly around Champaign, was pretty wet historically before you know, drainage efforts started. So we have a lot of wet prairie, and wet prairie has different species on it than a dry prairie. So here's an example up in Cook County, Camp Sagawa. Again, it's got blazing stars there. The Liatris, I think that's Spicata, the marsh blazing star. So there's wet prairies there. And a common plant on the wet prairie is this stunning queen of the prairie, Filipendula rubra, which is a rare plant in Illinois. It's tall, beautiful. It likes its feet wet, so it's in the wetter areas. But this is one that's actually easy to obtain and to grow in your home landscape as well, even though it's rare in the prairie. And we also have gravel prairies. So it's, you know, these prairies are characterized by the substrate and the moisture present. So this is a dry gravel prairie at Shoe Factory Road Prairie Nature Reserve. This is a cemetery prairie. It's just, you know, I'm talking about different types of prairie, and this is in Cook County. So often the gravel prairies were mined for gravel, and so they sometimes have, you know, a big, you know, sort of pit in them, and this one does. But, you know, in areas where that hadn't been significantly disturbed, we have high quality, priceless, irreplaceable Illinois prairie. And this picture really shows one of the aspects that make a prairie high quality, and that is the structure. So when we look at rating or classifying, ranking, grading these remnants, obviously we want to consider the composition, what plant species are there, and you make a list of the species that occur there. But then you also want to know the proportion or the distribution of those plants across the community type. And if you look at this picture, you see generally how evenly distributed and you know, most of these plants are. The white is the wild quinine, Parthenium integrifolium. The purple is lead plant again, Amorpha canescens. And yellow is the prairie coreopsis almeida. And you just see how they're spread throughout the prairie. Often, if you go to a prairie restoration where seeds have been scattered to put these plants back on the landscape, you don't see a high quality structure like this. They're clumpy and they're often dominated by grasses. Indian grass and big blue stem are often dominant in prairie restorations, but the really high quality ones have a lot of forbs that are present there. And then again, the distribution of the plants across the natural community is really an indicator of the high quality. Also, here's another gravel prairie at Bluff Spring Fen Nature Preserve in Cook County. Let's see the beautiful pale purple cone flowers there, Echinacea pallida, and it's really just a remarkable site there on gravel there up near Elgin, Illinois. And then also in Cook County, I've spent a lot of time in Cook County. There's a lot of nice nature preserves there. We have this one at Spring Creek. Spring Creek is in Barrington, and it's a prairie on a hill, but it's not a hill prairie. But it's, if we visit there in May, you can see the explosion of the shooting stars, Dodecatheon media or Primula media. You're up with the latest taxonomy. So, like I said, the mass blooms of plants change throughout the season. So you can just, one thing that's really an interesting exercise is to pick a site and go there once a week or once every 2 weeks for the whole year and observe, the different plants you see and the changes. It's just like a different site in some cases every time you visit because things change throughout the season. Also, we have sand prairies. So the substrate is sand. Of course, sand moves around a lot. It's blowing around. So plants have to be resilient to the changing conditions there. A high quality example occurs at Ayers Sand Prairie Nature Preserve in Carroll County. And we have here pictured the sand milkweed, Asclepias and plexicollis. It's really kind of a stranger looking milkweeds than the common milkweed and some of the others that are more common. But this one likes sand. And in Illinois, there's not a lot of sand deposits throughout the state. So typically it's along the large rivers. Mississippi and Illinois have sand. Around Springfield in Mason County, Macon County, and up around in the Northwest, Carroll County, Whiteside, and Henry County, there's a lot of sand, and you can find sand prairie there. Wild lupin is a plant that grows in these sand prairies. It's in the pea family, Lupinus perennis, and interesting there with the palmate leaves and the big, blue inflorescence. Just a gorgeous, gorgeous plant, and not that common in Illinois. Wild lupin. Another type of prairie is dolomite prairie. So we have dolomite prairie at Lockport Prairie Nature Preserve. I mentioned that earlier with Jerry Wilhelm's story. And this is along the Des Plaines River. So I mentioned, another implication of glacial times is that at the, when the glaciers were melting up around the Palos, Hills area of Cook County, there was an ice dam that blocked, impounded all the glacial meltwater behind it. And then that dam broke, melted, breached, and a huge torrent of water went ripping down the Des Plaines River Valley, and they call it the Kankakee Torrent. And the Kankakee Torrent scoured the soil down to bedrock along the shores of the river, and the bedrock is dolomite. So over time, organic, material would fill in the cracks and layering the dolomite, but it's very shallow soil. Dolomite's close to the surface. And dolomite is on the calcareous end of the spectrum. It's basic in pH, and so we have plants that are adapted to that particular community type on the dolomite. So you see that in Will County, and on dolomite prairies is where we have the leafy prairie clover, which is federally endangered, and it's the only federally endangered plant in Illinois. And it's actually doing quite well. But this plant was thought to have been extirpated for a long time and was rediscovered some of these sites in the 70s. This plant only occurs in Wisconsin, Illinois, Tennessee, and Alabama, federally endangered. So that is quite rare and special for the state. And another type of prairie is a shrub prairie. And shrub prairies are perhaps the rarest type of prairie. There's just not a lot of this remaining. And often, you think of, we want to keep shrubs out of the prairie, like dogwoods and sassafras and things. But this has shrubs like hazelnut and spirea. And so those are the shrubs that make it a shrub prairie. And there's a high quality example here in near Wilmington in Will County, a shrub prairie. Getting towards the end here, and the last type of prairie I want to mention in Illinois is hill prairie. And hill prairies are often along our major river systems, and they're perched up high on above cliffs, and they're really steep and west facing, where the west winds dry them out, and the sun facing from the south dries them out, and that's what hinders tree growth. And so these little hill prairies, some places they call them goat prairies, where all goats are the only animals that could kind of traverse these steep slopes. They're often capped in loess. So LOESS is loess. And I'm running out of time to explain loess, but you see the Mississippi River Valley there at one time that kind of affected how these sites were formed. There's a nice example at Revis Hill Prairie too in Mason County. And then I also want to mention that there's a limestone glade natural community type that's a type of bedrock community class, not prairie, but they often have a lot of prairie plants on them. And the limestone glades are in extreme southern Illinois, mostly in the Illinois Ozarks and the Lesser Shawnee Hills natural divisions, like at Cave Creek Glade Nature Preserve in Johnson County. And this plant blooming in profusion is wild hyacinth. I'm running out of time, but I'll quickly go through some other high quality prairie plants you may encounter if you visit some of these sites. Try to wrap up here at 6:50 so we can have some time for questions. Late in the year, you get the gentians that bloom, and they just have this rich blue color. There's not a lot of blue wildflowers in nature. And so this is just remarkable beauty that you really only find in high quality black soil prairies. This is a hard one to put back on the landscape, the prairie gentian. Of course, we also have the prairie lily that people joke and call deer candy. Deer love to eat the blooms. So they need full sun to bloom, and like I said, they're often eaten by deer. But here's a couple beautiful examples here at Somme Prairie and Somme Prairie Grove in Northbrook, Illinois. And then the rattlesnake master, it's found, in most prairies and restorations. It's pretty easy to grow. You can see the name Euringium yuccifolium. Yuccifolium means foliage like a yucca. And if you look at the leaves, they do resemble yucca. Not related though, but they have very fibrous leaves that pull apart in strips and were used for weaving and things. And I have a really kind of an interesting little story about that plant in my Prairie Cemetery Prairie video on YouTube. So check that out where I talk about the rattlesnake master. New Jersey tea, a pollinator magnet. This one, the kind of shrubby as well. Ceanothus americanus. Took this picture at Loda Cemetery. You can see the beautiful blooms, the New Jersey tea there. And white wild indigo bush, another prairie plant in the pea family. Kind of funny story about this one is the seed pods, they're big legumes, and often when you open them late in the year, the seeds are gone. They've been eaten, and sometimes you find weevils in there. So the weevils are kind of consuming these seeds. And what you do for a little joke with your companion is you get 2 weevils from the legume, break it open, put them on your palm, and make sure one weevil is smaller than the other. So then you point to your companion and you say, "You see how this weevil is smaller than this one? It's the lesser of 2 weevils." That's a Floyd Swink joke that was passed on to me years ago that I love to joke about. Lesser of 2 weevils, Baptisia alba, the white wild indigo bush. And I think this is the last slide. Another beautiful prairie plant that you don't see very commonly across Illinois, Indian paintbrush, Castellisia coccinea. It has a beautiful red bracts that occur. It's actually not the petals, or bracts that tend to flower, but they are the colorful portion of the plant, and it is a beautiful one to see. Oh, I didn't even talk about Eastern Prairie. Oh, that's right. That some of the rare plants. Eastern Prairie fringed orchids were one of the most common orchids across the tallgrass prairie, and now they're federally threatened. They were really in steep decline, and this is kind of a success story, though. In Illinois, we have done well to put this plant back on the landscape, and so it's doing a lot better than it has, with some sites having, in the thousands of blooming individuals every year. In fact, they use little toothpicks and they pollinate them by hand in some sites, and it's been very successful getting them to propagate. And the orchids make these capsules with tiny little seeds in them. So the seeds are pretty ubiquitous on the landscape, but they need to land where there's a mycorrhizal soil fungi relationship, and that actually feeds the plant until they're large enough to photosynthesize on their own. So orchids are restricted and picky where they grow because of mycorrhizal fungi symbiotic relationship that is required. And another stunner here is the Oklahoma grass pink orchid, only in one county in Illinois, very rare. And white lady slippers were also common across the wet prairie of Illinois. That was one that was formerly listed, but it's made a comeback as well. Some of these species we have been able to recover, including the white lady slipper orchid, Cypripedium candidum. Royal catchfly is another stunner that's easy to grow and endangered in Illinois. The beautiful red color. Red is kind of like blue. Not a lot of wildflowers have that deep red color. So that's a neat prairie plant. And then milkweed, we have woolly milkweed, pretty rare in Illinois in the prairie. And then these two, meads milkweed and oval leaf milkweed. Very rare. We've taken all the habitat for where these plants have occurred, and so that's make them rare, and they persist. They're hanging on almost just barely in some cases in Illinois. Lastly, I'll mention that if you want to see a nice large scale restoration of prairie, you can go to Nachusa grasslands owned by the Nature Conservancy in Lee and Ogle counties. Prairie cicadas are specific to high quality prairie, different than our periodic cicadas. And ornate box turtles are animals in the prairie, and as well as bison have been put back in the landscape at Nachusa and some other spots. So kind of rushing to the end there for time, but that is your whirlwind tour of the topic of Illinois pioneer cemetery prairies. Again, I encourage you to check out my YouTube channel. I have 3 videos, but particularly view the one on pioneer cemetery prairies. It's really, I think, a good companion to this talk. And check out my website, and feel free to email me at any time if you want a copy of the map or any questions or anything like that. So thank you for the opportunity to present the program, and I'd be happy to answer any questions if there are some.
And we do have some, Chris. Thank you.
Okay.
Let's start with one of our audience members asked if these cemeteries are open to the public, or do they require permission before going there?
So the ones that I covered in the talk, the ones that I've been to, are all open to the public. Vermont, I mentioned, has a gate around it, so you can't go into the prairie, but you can view it from behind the fence. But all the other ones are open. They're Illinois nature preserves, publicly owned. The only concern there is tread, walk carefully to protect the plants, and have smaller group sizes and things like that. But yes, they are open to the public.
And you mentioned be careful of the plants. In other nature areas I've been to in Illinois, you're asked to clean off your boots or your shoes before you enter onto the path or the area. These seem to be very fragile areas, precious areas. Should people be taking special care to clean off their shoes? Is there something they should do in places like this?
That is a great point, Donna. Yes, it is recommended that you clean your boots or your shoes before going to any nature preserve or high quality site, because we have such a problem with invasive species, and often the seeds are very small and not easily seen. And if they're introduced to a site, that could really change the composition. So these sites don't have trails often, so you kind of have to just walk through them, and that's why I say just walk carefully. like with your point too, have clean shoes and clean pant cuffs and things so that you're not introducing any seed to the site. And you just walk with deliberately and keep in mind that these plants are rare, and if they get stepped on by lots of people, they're going to have a harder time to grow.
Wow. Okay, we have another question from our audience asking, so is there no organization statewide that is responsible for these prairies?
That is correct. A lot of the prairies are Illinois nature preserves, and which is up to the landowner to dedicate them in that system. But once dedicated as a nature preserve, we have a nature preserves commission. There's 9, district field representatives that have jurisdiction to help these prairies. But as most people know, the 9 people for the entire state and limited budgets and all those things make it very difficult to properly manage a lot of these sites. And that's why we do rely heavily on volunteers. And like I mentioned before, the Master Naturalist program, those individuals have to have certain number of hours to every year. And these are excellent ways to get hours to help these natural communities with, pulling invasive plants or helping with prescribed fire or whatever the needs are. And you just need to find out who is managing the site and see if there's a way that you can help.
That's good to know. Are those groups that are doing these different sites available as a list on your website? Could you provide us with that information or something that I could post about how people who might be interested in volunteering could reach?
As I mentioned before, I really think try with the University of Illinois Extension, whoever is running the Master Naturalist program in your district or region, as well as the Heritage Division at the Illinois Department of Natural Resources, either the Nature Preserve field representative or the district heritage biologist. Between those 3 sources, they'll direct you in the right place, because a lot of these cemetery prairies are owned by a cemetery association, and those are different for each one. So there's no real, one group or connection for a lot of these other than through the state nature preserve system.
Okay, good to know. All right, I noticed on your map that we have 3 of these wonderful places fairly close to LaSalle. One is in LaSalle. It looked like it was at the far southern end of LaSalle County on the Livingston border. The other was up in Lamoille in Bureau County, and another one, it was in Putnam County, Mount Palatine. Could you tell us more about those?
Let's see here. So it looks like 13, 16, and 2.
I see 2 is the LaSalle County line.
Okay.
And Putnam is that 18? And 13, I think, is Lamoille. 16 is Putnam.
16.
I have my glasses on.
So I have not been to any of those. So I don't have any information about them, unfortunately. So those are ones I'm going to have to prioritize to visit this year or sometime soon. And a lot of, like I said, if you Google these sites, I have trouble finding good information on this topic. So unfortunately, I don't know anything about those 3 particular examples.
Okay, well, we will contact our extension office. We do a lot of work with them, and we'll get some information. And if I get it, I will send it off to you, and we'll certainly post it on our website for our audience.
Terrific.
These areas must really support a lot of wildlife, and of course, they provide beauty and are really a precious resource. What I found really fascinating was Illinois was first. It was just great to hear that tonight.
We definitely, the topic is pioneer cemetery prairies, but Illinois has been a pioneer in the natural areas movement. And, in the 70s and 80s, Illinois Department of Natural Resources, or formerly Department of Conservation, really set the standard. And a lot of other states modeled their natural areas program based from ours, with the work of George Fell and John Schwegman and lots of other legendary biologists that made their home and their career in Illinois.
Well, it's wonderful to know, and this has been a great presentation. We've learned, I'm sure, a lot. I know I have. We'll have to have you come back again. I can think of a lot of other things I want to know about this subject. I will close soon. I'm going to thank our audience for sticking with us and their attention. I wanted to remind everybody to check out our website or our social media for our upcoming program on the 26th about American heiresses as they make their way during the Gilded Age to Europe looking for some titles and aristocracy. So that would be from Uptown Girls to Downton Abbey. And we hope you can take a look at that and join us for that program too. And with that, Chris, I want to thank you again. This has just been fascinating, and I will turn it back to you for closing comments.
Well, again, I just want to thank you for the opportunity to present, and hopefully we enter a post-pandemic world soon, which we can have in-person programming, and perhaps I will be in the area at some time in the future, and I'd like to meet some of you and whenever that works out. So again, thanks for the invite. Thanks for listening, and I appreciate it.
One of these days, we'll be back to doing in-person programming. Thank you again, Chris. We'll say good night, and I'll be closing for now.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Okay. Okay. Bye-bye.